talk,
identity,
and access
management.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim right there. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. Doing this call today from home. I've got my mask on, so hopefully my audio is clear. Even though there's nobody around me, I'm completely paranoid.
Well, it's a fashion statement at this point.
Yeah, exactly. I look really good in my mask.
You're like one of those rock stars, right? That wears like the mask over their face, and they're shirtless with the guitar, and it's just a totally unique vibe.
Yeah, I could take my mask and I could put like one of those cool tribal tattoos on it.
Ooh,
That's a really good idea.
Yeah. So
that's why people tune in. That's why people tune into this podcast, Jeff, is for ideas like that.
Ideas like that, and the visuals, disturbing as they might be, that they may invoke. So we were, in the middle of have a break of travel. I know you were in New York last week, and I was in San Francisco for the RSA conference. It sounds like we've both survived at this point.
Yeah, travel's getting a little worrisome, but we're road warriors, so what are we going to do?
Yeah, well, you got your mask and some buckets of hand sanitizer, which is becoming increasingly harder to find, but I'm sure supply will ease up soon.
Yeah, it's just alcohol gel, so it's not like it's really that hard to manufacture, I don't think.
Well, yeah, that's the whole thing, though, is where is it coming from? How's it going to get there? Logistics, man.
That's right.
So we have a guest today. We've got Esteban. He manages the identity and access management for an analytics firm. Welcome to the podcast, Esteban.
Hello, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Great. So I know we're going to have a couple of different things we're going to talk about today, but before we dive into any of that, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you got into the IAM field, because that's typically how we like to start.
Sure, absolutely. So I started out on the technical side. I worked started up a long time ago in the help desk and worked my way up through several different companies and did system administration, system engineering. And recently, a few years ago, I was specializing in messaging on Microsoft Messaging with Exchange. And I got into a project where we were doing email consolidation from different companies. We're consolidating into one email system. And the way that system was designed architecturally was that we were going to use password sync so that the Outlook clients would be able to connect from different domains into the domain where we were hosting the email system. So I kind of fell into it because I had to get those accounts to sync. And I was looking for ways for that to happen. And that's one of the functions of IAM, right? To maintain the password synced between accounts. I didn't know it at the time, but I started looking at different ways to do it. I was good at scripting with PowerShell. So I did a lot of scripts to manage attributes in accounts so that they were in sync between different domains. And it's a number of domains, right? So it was like around 50 at the time.
That's a lot.
And so there was a lot of work there. And then that evolved to, it's taking up all my time to get this to work, right? What tools are available in the organization that can help manage this? And we had at the time, we don't have this anymore, but we had a CA identity manager. And nobody really owned it, so I kind of took ownership of that. And what I mean by nobody owned it is that I couldn't identify who's the subject matter expert. So by de facto, after a couple of months, after a year or so, people just started asking me about the system, and I had some answers. And before you knew it, I owned it. I was a subject matter expert.
Well, congratulations.
That's funny. Yeah, exactly. Congratulations. It's funny, Jeff. So often when we meet with clients for the first time, it's like, I can hear your voice. Who owns IAM here? And all the blank stares that you get, like, what does that mean? It means things just like what Esteban's talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking too, if you're scoring at home, and this was like our first episode was how do people get into IAM? I'm going to count Esteban, and hopefully you'll agree, is that you kind of fell into it. Is it something that you kind of just started in? Would that be fair?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I fell
So this,
into it and I started using the word IAM myself, and other people started using it, and it became a thing here.
well, I feel better about that. I know sometimes people want to argue the other position, but I have all the data points that I like that I'm going to use that say that most people fall into IAM. So why don't we talk a little bit about what is your current role? I guess what are you when I say you manage IAM for an analytics firm? Can you talk a little about kind of your day to day on your current role?
Sure. So when like I said, when I started out in the technical side, I was working in the IT department, and I was focused on getting things to work. But there's a security aspect to this, right? And I started to get involved more in the managing the controls of security because of audit, right? Audit would get a finding there was no one available to answer it. So I would jump in and say, hey, I know about that. Here's the reason why the accounts weren't terminated, for example. And so I would create a report, and uh, the administration, right? So that's really how I got into administration.
Okay.
So I did identity administration because uh, there was it was a level of immaturity, or maturity level, a very low maturity level. Let me put it that way. There was a low
Mhm.
maturity level in provisioning. So there was a lot of manual work. There was manual terminations. Uh, there was a lot of it was done by a lot of work was done by the either the help desk. Some ownership was in other departments for access management of applications, access management to a specific domain would be done by one group as opposed to a centralized uh, IT organization. And uh, at one point in time, the organization decided, you know what, this is really part of security. So I was asked to become part of the security department, right? Which is distinct from IT in that
Mhm.
it reports separately, completely separate from IT. It doesn't report up to the CIO; it reports up to the uh, risk and compliance.
Let me pause you there if I could, Esteban. So
Mm.
do see that in certain organizations, and um, but I'd say probably in the majority of organizations, I see information security within IT. What do you have in your mind? What are the pros and cons of having information security within IT versus outside? Because for me, having information security outside of IT, kind of enforces that concept of the watchdog. It's guarding not the fox guarding the hen house. It's a true watchdog guarding the hen house, watching out for the fox. What are your thoughts
Right.
when it comes to that?
So there's a service delivery aspect to IAM, and a security aspect to it, right? So let's take password resets, for example. If someone calls in because they need access, they lock their account, they need to reset their password, they expect to call the help desk and get the answer and get the accounts unlocked right away, or get the password changed, right, as a service. They expect that to happen as a routine um, a routine call. Now, on the security side, the whole reason we have passwords in the first place is to prevent um, unauthorized users to get in, or people guessing the password. So there's in the security aspect side, uh, someone has to determine what the policy is. How many tries is it going to take for the password to lock out in the account? How often do you have to change your passwords? That's all built into the operational management, right? What I call the first line of defense. It's all built in. It's operated by the help desk in most cases. Um, and that's the security aspect of it. So the operational or service delivery aspect of that operation is expectation of sort of like a SLA. If I call in, I shouldn't be questioned. I should just get access to my account. But there's a reason why that your account locks up if you don't know your password, right? You might not be the person that is trying to get access to the proper account.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. And Jeff, I know you've seen this too. The delivery of these services versus that watchdog um, function when it comes to IAM. IAM is a little bit different than maybe infrastructure services and things like that. But even then, I mean, a lot of times IT is delivering the service, whereas information security has an oversight function. Jeff, what have you seen, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, I still see IAM rolling up to information security and information security rolling up to IT as the most common, but it's not unheard of to have it roll up to something like risk compliance or even legal. I've seen that once. Um, I guess I don't really care so much where it rolls up into. To me, it's more about, does that organization have enough, or does the security team have enough um, organizational impact? Whether it's identity and access management having the right juice, so to speak, be able to push forward policy, procedure, best practices, whatever it may be. I've seen things where CISOs are buried down within an IT organization, and they report to like an infrastructure person, and we've seen CISOs that report directly to the CIO or the CEO. So I don't know if necessarily the right or wrong way to do it, as long as that person has enough authority to drive change within the organization. That's probably the more important thing. I don't
Yeah,
know
and I
if
kind of
politically you'd want to be buried that low, but within the
no.
organization. But I would say the higher the better, just because it assumes some level of authority within the organization.
Yeah, and I've seen situations where CISOs are, they don't have any direct reports, and IT is driving all the change, and the CISO is more of just a policy setter. But I've also seen this situation where a CISO owns a lot of IT services, including IAM. And one of the pros and if we talk about the cons of that situation, is that CISO would be responsible for approving security testing, for example. And when you're approving security testing and you've got, here are the certain standards, this kind of testing must be performed, all the high risk uh, items are resolved before going live, et cetera. And when you're a watchdog, you can kind of stick to, here are the guidelines. Now all of a sudden you're a CISO and you have to deliver to a commitment that you've made about going live on whatever March 1st, and your IAM team comes to you and says, we're not, we've got these high issues and things like that. And now the CISO's stuck between, I can either stick to my framework or I can meet my commitment of going live on time. And so it's a tricky situation. And I think from the standpoint of us as consultants, because people say to us, what is best practice? And I think we see it working well in multiple different scenarios. But I think you need to understand the pros and cons when you go into that, and kind of choose the model that makes sense for your organization.
Yeah, I mean, I come from organizations where the CISO owns a lot of the service delivery, and if an organization can't trust their CISO, then you got other problems, man. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Sure, there's going to be things that may affect service delivery when it comes to moving things to production or not being ready or serving security checklists, etc. But ultimately, it's a risk decision, and just like any other part of the business, whoever heads up that part is going to make a decision based on that. And ultimately, if things work out, great. If they don't, they're on the hook for it, responsible for it. So I think anybody who is in a position of approving things like that needs to understand that. And hopefully they do, by the time they reach that level. But man,
It's
if your
true. It's
CISO's
true.
bending rules, you got problems.
It's true. Everything you're saying. imagine the scenario where you're you're rolling out a brand new IAM platform. You're spending 25, $50,000 a month in consulting. You've delayed the go live twice already. You've committed to a new go live date. You get there, and now you're having some issues that are, within your power to grant an exception for. So that's the scenario, and I think you're right. I mean, it comes down to integrity, but it's also, um, a potential conflict of interest.
Yeah, it's certain. I can certainly see where that conflict might be. Um, Esteban, you were talking about operational management, and I know that before we started up the podcast, we were talking about the three lines of defense risk management and how that's affecting your IM program. Operational management was number one. What was number two and number three? And then maybe we can dive into a little bit around those other topics.
Sure. So the second one is actually called the second line of defense, and that's
It's a clever name.
more. Yeah, I did not make this up, so it does come from Institution of Internal Auditors, I believe. But I find it very useful because as I look at the program and I work on developing it, uh, I use the model, the three line of defenses, and I'll describe the second one is really overseeing risks, right? I look at the second line of defense as somewhat more independent from operational management, where the controls exist, so that uh, there's latitude in the ability to perform monitoring and assign accountability, right? So uh, in operational management, there are system owners, right? There's also data owners, there's business owners, and sometimes they don't know who they are, right? So with some independence and some uh, monitoring, right, and risk management uh, uh, aspect to the IAM program, you're easier able to identify and communicate to the business that you're the probable owner of this resource, and this is why, right? You can show them metrics, you can show them location of data, systems that are not claimed by anyone. You can say, is this your system? If it's not, then whose is it? Should we decommission it? Does it belong to anyone? Is it orphaned, and so on? So that's where that type of thought process, to me, falls in the second line of defense. I take a step away from operational management. I have a chance to independently look at the environment, examine the data collected, the set of monitoring, right, and then go back to the business and mainly really determine. Talk to the business, talk to the system owners, make sure that those risks are assigned to someone so they can be managed.
And yeah, we talked about this a little bit before, Esteban. So you maintain some sort of risk register, right? And maybe we could talk about that and kind of what form it takes and what are the different data points that are collected on a risk register.
Right. So just to be clear, we do work. We have what we call information risk officers, and they maintain a risk register, right? So it's not specialized risk register. It's an overall organizational risk register, where if for example, if I can't find an owner of a resource, I can't assign ownership or an accountability, and nobody takes it. Well, that's a risk, right? That needs to be escalated up to senior management, and that's where the risk register kicks in. So I work with my information risk officer for the line of business, right? Identify the risk, they document it, and and then they bring it up in senior management meetings, right? So like that, they can accept that nobody owns a resource, right? And it can't be governed, or can't we can't do any access reviews on it. Uh, and at least they know, and they have to either accept it or try to mitigate it, work on mitigating it on a plan.
That's excellent. So you're saying the risk register, the impression I'm getting is that it goes beyond just IT risk. There's probably other forms of risk, certainly within your organization. My experience with a risk register is two of the key uh, levers within that are likelihood and impact of a risk. So, we could talk about, all right, well, coronavirus could impact our ability to deliver IT services. What is the likelihood that it's going to happen? You could do something like high, medium, low, and then what is the impact in terms of cost impact to the business or ability to provide services, which could be related back to cost. Do you use something similar in your risk register?
Well, absolutely. So there are risks that may merit a lot of effort, time, and money, right? And there are risks that may be acceptable, right? What I don't want to get involved in is making the actual decision as we're trying to step away from being the risk owners, right? So that we can have that second line of defense oversight over the organization. So going back to assigning ownership, right, or a resource or a process, even, we're able to present the risk, and together with the information risk officer, we can determine what the risk level is, and with the risk owner, really, right? We get together with the business, the risk owner, and determine what the level of the risk is, and we document it in the risk register, and then the risk register contains the elements of information that determines whether the recommendations are made to accept the risk or to elevate the risk and remediate the risk.
So that's the second line of defense, risk management. First line was operation management. What's the third line?
So the third line is pretty much audit, right? So collecting artifacts, right? To when audit comes in and wants to look at your operations, having the ability to easily produce artifacts, having good audit trails. These are things that would do in the first line of defense, really, or your second line of defense. That's it would fall into either one of those. You would actually, the way I would look at it is I would um, make sure that the first line of defense, as a second line of defense operator, I would make sure that there's a good audit trail on all of the management controls. So then, when audit comes in, we can produce the artifacts for what they're asking for, anything that they're asking for. But here's why I think about this really, and why I brought it up in the first place. The third line of defense. What I noticed over the years, what's been happening is that audit would come in, look at the controls, examine it, and they would find gaps. Right? They would find gaps in risks and ask us to remediate it. So what would happen is we would start fixing things, and in effect, we instead of designing controls for IAM, we would be reacting, right? We would be doing security by audit, I would say, instead of security by design. And then you can get stuck in a mouse wheel doing that over time because they can compound over time if you're not monitoring, if you're not evaluating risk or designing security into your first line of defense. Audit will come over and point it out, right? So it takes an extra effort to spot things that should be improved, like being able to see blind spots from your second line of defense vantage point that you sometimes cannot do as a owner of a control, right? Because you're busy running the business, you're just operating the controls, you're just responding to the queue. Let's say if you're the help desk, right? You're interested in uh, resolving as many issues as you can with the processes that are in place, but you're not necessarily spending a lot of time looking at the risk. And as a second line of defense operator, you're spending more time in the oversight function to be able to spot those risks that before the third line of defense kicks in and finds it for you.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes audit controls can be a little bit like sticking your fingers in holes in a boat, and you end up with so many different holes and so many different fingers, and it's like, okay, well, you know, it's if it's not by design secure, then you're going to run out of plugs to put in there. So I can see that
Right. And
certainly happening.
Yeah, and a lot of thought went into, well, how do we manage that, right? Because we're so busy operating our controls and responding to evolving situations that are based a lot on service delivery and some of it security. But when audit season, I call it, comes in, sometimes we find things that we weren't aware of because we didn't have continuous monitoring on a particular item. Like, let's say, for example, terminations, right? So if audit finds that an account wasn't terminated on time, if we tell them, no, they get terminated within 24 hours after their termination date, um, and you have a management control that does that, let's say automatically with your identity management system, you don't think about it a lot because you have the system is taking care of it. Uh, you don't think about it until audit comes in and finds something that hasn't been terminated for over that
Mhm.
time period that you told them it does.
Yeah, then it becomes a matter of, okay, what happened with that, right? And you start
Exactly.
to trace backwards. Okay, well, were they terminated in the HR system in a timely manner? And sometimes it happens, sometimes it didn't. Maybe something's broken. I've seen things where control highlights an area where for some reason the IGA application didn't function as it was supposed to, and I've also seen it where it was a process breakdown ahead of that where the IGA application did exactly what it was supposed to do. It just never received the information in a timely manner. So it's a good way to spot
Usually
some of those
it's
issues.
absolutely, and usually over time, as we've matured the terminations um, functionality in the IGA system, it's usually a process issue, right? When a process
Mhm.
changes, let's say in the HRMS system or in HR in general, or even finance, right? If finance codes change, because there's multiple departments that get involved in provisioning, and if something changes there, you may not spot it without good monitoring. So setting up monitoring from the perspective of a second line of defense function um, ahead of um, ahead of audit, you don't have to uh, respond to audits as much as normally would have to. At least that's the goal, right?
Yeah,
Esteban, I've got a comment and then a question. So as you're
Sure.
talking about this, I'm thinking, okay, a lot of what you're talking about with audit is, compliance driven, whether it's compliance with regulations or compliance with your own policies and standards. Uh, I'm also thinking that, you know, we as IAM practitioners can't only live within the realm of, hey, we're compliant, all the boxes are checked. We need to make sure that the environment is secure. And that ought to be probably our most important driver. Um, Thinking, just a couple random thoughts as you were talking, thinking about identity governance as kind of a backstop to that, so that if processes don't succeed, you're going to catch that this account was never deactivated in the first place. So, really to me, that's one of the biggest benefits you get from identity governance. And then I thought to myself, well, in a way, then identity governance serves the role of monitoring. But you've mentioned monitoring a few times, and I wanted to get from you, what are the components of monitoring that you're talking about here?
So in the examples I've used, most basic form of monitoring I can think of is reconciling the HR systems with the access systems, right? Making sure that, and that's a challenge because, like in most companies, um, employees and consultants or contractors, contingent workers are managed separately, separate processes. From the audit perspective, it should work the same, whether they should either have access when they're supposed to have access or they shouldn't. And if finance manages contingent workers separately than HR does, because HR is more concerned with management of regular employees, then I have to develop governance processes to monitor any discrepancies between finance and HR to catch um, contingent workers that don't belong in the system anymore.
Yeah, I think contingent workers is a big one. My experience with running through audits is normally, all right, well, you know, let's use myself as an example. Jim McDonald was terminated on such and such a date, and now we're going to check, a few systems to make sure that his account was shut off. My bigger concern from a security standpoint is, well, Jim McDonald was a system administrator. Maybe he created some accounts, some test accounts, and things like that. Even if his front door access is turned off, what if he were able to somehow get onto the network, or provide those application credentials to somebody else, and you have now a weak point within your system. And to me, that's one of the big benefits of governance is we're not just looking at Jim McDonald's HR account, his main ID, or even just like his domain administrator ID, but we're also going to each application, pulling all the accounts and entitlements into a system. We're obviously marrying up the obvious, this is Jim McDonald's main account, but now we've got a bunch of other accounts that don't seem to fit to an individual. Somebody's got to tie those accounts off to a person, or somehow those accounts need to be managed. I'm talking machine to machine accounts, I'm talking test accounts and shared administrative accounts. And somehow we need to make sure from a security perspective, they might not get caught by audit, but we need to make sure that those accounts get shut off. And that's a big benefit of a well-designed governance program.
Yeah, I agree with that because I
Uh,
think sometimes auditors aren't enough, but I don't think that's really what you're saying, Esteban, is that's just another component of it, right? So if you got your risk management framework, your compliance functions, and your auditors and your operations, between the three, you should be covering not only, what is, but what should be within the environment. So between technical controls and business process, the goal is to be more secure. Um, and that's pretty much what you'll be looking for.
Absolutely. That's getting ahead of audit, right? Because they've also been evolving. I've noticed, and the scope of audits have been getting ever more sophisticated, and it's only a matter of time that we start looking at like RPA accounts, which are being deployed into finance.
RPA meaning process automation, robotic process.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep. RPA is robotic process automation.
That's correct. So the robotic accounts are very similar to the human accounts in that they're interactive, right? You set them up to log in and do functions as humans, but they're not meant to. So they need to be managed, right? Um, and if they're involved in activities that are regulated, are SOX regulated, then the scope of audit increases, and setting up governance over non-human accounts becomes much more important.
Yeah, and we had our last show we talked about a little bit about Internet of Things, and I think kind of that falls into it. But I think that's probably a good way to kind of break it for right now. I certainly appreciate the time you spent with us here, and for again those three lines of defenses. In case people want to kind of recap, was operation management, risk management, and the audit side of things. That's 1, 2, and 3. Esteban or Jim, do you guys have anything else that you'd like to add to that before we wrap up?
Yeah, just one quick question for us, Juan. You mentioned a standard framework that you reference. Um, can you recap that for us?
Sure. So there's a publication from the Institute of Internal Auditors. Uh, it's called a position paper from 2013. So if you Google that IIA, Institute of International Auditors, position paper 2013, you'll find what I've been looking at to think about how to develop my program based on the different lines of defenses.
And what was that paper number again?
So it's the name of it is Institute of Internal Auditors, position paper 2013.
2013. I will look for that up and put that into the show notes, hopefully, so people can reference that as well. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to leave it for right now. Esteban, appreciate the time you spent with us here today, and look forward to talking to you in the future. Jim, as
My pleasure.
always, we'll talk to you, I'm sure, at some point, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, hopefully mask free.
Hopefully mask free. Folks, stay safe out there. Keep listening. And if you like what you heard, don't forget you can listen to more episodes at identityatthecenter.com. And we're always looking for feedback on topics or just general comments. You can send those to questions@identityatthecenter.com. And we'll talk to you all in the next one. Thanks. You've been listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. For more episodes, visit identityatthecenter.com.